I feel like most people who consider themselves gamers have been gamers for a long time, like since they were kids. I know that that was my experience, with my first console being the Sega Genesis, playing Street Fighter II and Streets of Rage, only then to get shuffled over to the Nintendo 64 and being exposed to Zelda Ocarina of Time. I had an OG Game Boy Color with the transparent purple plastic and Pokemon Blue version, and then finally one day my dad bought a new computer and I got his old hand-me-down E-machines with Diablo 2 and Lord of Destruction on it, which captivated my attention for what feels like decades. And to be honest, that game is kind of a goat of an ARPG. But then later being exposed to MMOs like World of Warcraft and Guild Wars 1. This story might be unique based on the titles that I mentioned, but I'm sure everyone has more or less a similar story. And as time goes on, the games that we thought we enjoyed can become dull, and it can be kind of hard to find a replacement. Well, after watching this video, you should have a good idea as to why you are having a hard time and what you can do to finally put that search to an end. First, I want to talk about the gaming industry in general, because sometimes the things you desire in a game come with necessary evils that are unavoidable. Right now, most large studios are focused around live service games or games as a service. It's a monetization technique that basically encourages players to continuously fund a game after its initial download or purchase. The most obvious games are pretty much all of Riot's games with League of Legends and Valorant, and pretty much every MMO regardless of if they have a subscription fee or not. The biggest one right now is probably Fortnite. These games are intrinsically designed to farm engagement, meaning that they will use FOMO, game design, battle passes, or other cash shop rotations to essentially make sure you come back and play regularly. Because the more you play, the more likely you are to bust out that credit card and spend money. The reasons for development studios to adopt this model is entirely financial. It doesn't make the game better, it makes their pockets fatter, and that's it. With that being said, some gaming elements that you enjoy may only be available in games following that model, albeit unevenly distributed among titles of the same genre. Speaking of gaming elements, let's look at the research. There are a few articles that highlight what motivations people have for playing video games, and when taken to the extreme, it results in what is classified as internet gaming disorder or online gaming addiction. But the vast majority of gamers are not addicts, they're normal people. But games can take many forms, and one of the better categorizations of games can be found on the Quantic Foundry website. This survey breaks down gaming motivations into 6 primary categories with 12 subcategories, so I'll be using them as reference. These categories are action, social, mastery, achievement, immersion, and creativity. This company has classified gamers into 9 various personality types. However, with an understanding of these classifications and what appeals to you, you can relate your personal profile to an actual gaming genre or style of game. But this video is not about personality types. Nobody cares if you're a Sagittarius or if you belong to the Slytherin house. But the reason I bring this up is so that way we have a starting point and where we can start relating these classifications to popular game titles to help us figure out what games we will actually enjoy. For me, I was always a big MMO fan through my youth and early adulthood, and the MMO genre typically tries to hit as many of these aspects as possible. They do it fairly bland. The MMO game genre is like a restaurant that serves everything, whereas oftentimes you'll have a better quality experience going to a place focusing on Italian food or going to a steakhouse. Just because you like the everything that the MMO provides does not necessarily mean that you can't or won't enjoy a game that is more focused if you can determine what that focus is. And that's what we're going to try to do. Let's take a look at the social element and what it is associated with. The social aspect is associated with community. One of the biggest appeals for PC gamers is the ability to play with one another, establish guilds, clans, or other communities around a common interest or platform. This is where MMOs typically shine. Games like World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy, Guild Wars 2, Throne and Liberty, or any number of the top 10 MMOs of 2025 will typically typically put you into this category. The real kicker is the size of the community. The vast majority of players aren't really in tune with 25 other people or 30 or 50 other people. They only really interact with anywhere from 5 to 10. It is true that MMOs typically tailor the bulk of their content around player counts, but other games have been able to foster communities where the group limits are 5 players. Games like Monster Hunter, Remnant 2, League of Legends, Call of Duty all have social and community aspects that scratch that itch with a smaller max player count. The other social element is competition. Now, competition in video games can take many forms, but it typically means player versus player. Any game that has strong PvP elements or leaderboard elements intends to scratch this itch. And the competition components are highlighted best by any game with a healthy or profitable major league gaming scene. League of Legends was one of the first games that absolutely blew up the MLG scene, but Call of Duty, FIFA, Madden, and a lot of retro speedrunning scenes like Super Mario 64 or Ocarina of Time tend to focus on this competition element of gaming. Moving on to the action category, we have elements that are more broad and seem to focus around themes and gameplay more so than actual game systems. In this category, we have destruction, which is highlighted by guns, swords, and general violence. Games like Helldivers 2, Space Marine 2, Remnant 2, and the Devil May Cry series fall into this action category, where your primary gameplay focus is either shooting, killing, or hack and slashing. Also in this category, we have excitement. This has to do with story and gameplay pacing. There are game elements that can serve to slow down or inhibit the player. This typically involves unskippable cutscenes, resource mechanics that require repairing gear or things of that nature. Those are all excitement inhibitors, and games that are high in excitement are fast-paced. The games I mentioned under destruction also typically have a lot of high excitement, and typically you won't have one without the other to some extent. Under the mastery category, we are venturing into a somewhat slower set of games since this category is defined by strategy and challenge. The strategy aspect is simple for games, with this being their primary focus. Games like chess highlight this, but many turn-based games or puzzle games focus on strategy. Many games where buildcraft is a primary focus tend to scratch this strategy itch. And the issue lies with game developers trying to balance strategies to have an interesting playstyle without having an overly dominant meta. In terms of challenge, this often comes in the form of difficulty, and this is where your Souls genre gets its bread and butter. This is where players who want to feel challenged work through a highly punishing game. This also accounts for high levels of sweat or performance in various raid scenes, where players tend to try and take down or get fast clears of the hardest versions of encounters. In the achievement category, we have completion and power. Completion can be found in the PlayStation Platinum communities and often are focused around games that have achievements, which in modern gaming is nearly everything. But MMOs and more social games quantify this through achievement scores or a set number of achievements for any given content release. For box titles or non-live service games, this comes from account statistics or Steam achievement statistics. Power is in reference to the typical power fantasy where you start off relatively weak and you get stronger over time. Most games have some mechanic that gives you power through either skill progression or gear treadmills. This can be done through a crafting system or through monster drops or through skill trees that get upgraded. It's pretty self-explanatory, and most action games have some sort of power reference in them. The category of immersion is one that usually breaks down in live service games. However, in box games or single player games, it is significantly easier to maintain the feeling of the overall game. This category has two elements, fantasy and story. And these elements are high on the list. They are best highlighted by single-player RPGs more than any other category, since gameplay elements, repeatable or engagement-focused content won't need to be shoehorned into the finished product. Gear treadmills or cash shop items won't need to break the fundamental feeling of any given environment. Overall, both fantasy and story can really be anything. It doesn't need to fall into the fantasy realm in terms of like dragons and swords or typical D&D stuff, but it can be futuristic, it can be space, or any other kind of non-realism. Story can be broken down into more upfront and direct storytelling, or even more nuanced, sandboxy storytelling done through flavor text and quest items. It all just depends on your preference. The last category of classification is creativity, which covers design and discovery. Games that are about base building, open world sandboxes, player housing, or even slower games like Animal Crossing, The Sims, Stardew Valley, and so on have this category at its forefront. So now that we have these categories identified alongside their various elements, we can analyze games that we have historically enjoyed and see what we like and dislike about them. And we can find new titles that will likely appeal to those same elements. I'll use myself as an example and analyze some of my favorite games. First up, Guild Wars 2. This is a game that I built this channel on here, and it's a game that I am deeply in tune with. MMOs have nearly every element in the game, and they have community elements, challenge elements, action and design elements, but the primary reason I played were for strategy and completion, with a lesser extent being power and design. To find a new game series that scratches these itches, I found that XCOM 2 is a great strategy itch as a tactical turn-based RPG. For challenge, I found Lies of P, which is a Souls-like and a single-player story with learnable and punishing boss encounters. For completionism, I am hoping that Monster Hunter Wilds will fill this gap alongside various design elements. And for the community aspect, I have you guys here on YouTube. I have found that the game genre labeling is largely up to preference. Metroidvania, roguelike, Souls-like, MMO, RPG, ARPG, and so on are just broad categories of gaming styles, as opposed to actually matching up a game with the particular gaming motivation that you might be interested in. And ultimately, it is up to you to determine what you like most about the games that you play and find games that have similar elements, and hopefully avoid the Steam library graveyard that we all seem to have. With that, I hope this video helps explain some of the motivations that people have to play video games, and hopefully it helps you determine what games might be right for you. Thanks for watching. A big thanks to all my subscribers, and a special thanks to all my members who support the channel. If you want to become a member, there's a link in the description. Thanks again, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace.